Welcome to the Sixers' first game of the season, sort of. It's the preseason action in full effect here on the PHLY Sixers podcast presented by Coors Light and our good friends from Bet365. We appreciate everybody for hanging out with us as we get things started with the preseason schedule. Alongside Rich Hoffman, I'm Devon Givens. Kyle and Derek are at the arena. Brianna is here with us. We'll check in with the guys as we go along. We'll get into some post-game things after the game as well. But we're excited to have basketball back. And yes, although it is preseason and it is against the visiting New Zealand Breakers, you're like, who are these people? Well, they did play the Utah Jazz over the weekend. We can talk about them and what they did against the Jazz, who they have in their lineup. We've talked about Jonah Bolden quite a bit, Taco Fall, but who else is on the roster? This is a young 17-year-old kid that has a lot of people's interest around the basketball circles as far as the NBA goes in the very near future. We'll get into everything, the injury report and all, but Rich, it is great to be back. Albeit just preseason basketball, we do have some semblance of basketball, and we get a chance to see some Sixers. We'll give out the starting lineup in just a bit, but basketball is back, man.
Basketball is back, man. And you're right. This game, I mean, it's going to be kind of basketball, you know, as we're going to get to the two big guns on this team. Well, two of the three big guns are definitely not going to play in this game. But this is how the Sixers usually do it. I mean, I remember some of the most memorable games have been when some of these foreign teams have come in. Do you remember? I think they were playing a team from China. I forget the name of the team.
The Lions is all I remember.
The Long Lions.
Yeah.
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 That was the game where Joel Embiid basically shamed Ben Simmons into shooting a three that was not in rhythm at all at the end of the half, and Ben drilled it, by the way.
Yes,
what a ridiculous moment that was. The Sixers were up by 35 points or something at that point in the game. It's going to be good to see these guys. Like, look, the Sixers have a lot of new guys. Like, even without Paul George not playing tonight, like, there are a lot of new faces here. Hopefully we get to see Tyrese and, make sure that he hasn't gotten any worse at basketball. I think he probably hasn't. But there are a lot of new players here that I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see how they look in Nick Nurse's system. So, look, we're baby steps, right?
Yes.
This doesn't need to be the most serious game in the world tonight, but we're going to have fun watching some hoops.
No question about it. Well, we teased it already, but just to give out the starting lineup for tonight, the starting lineup is announced. Tyrese Maxey, to your point, he is in the starting lineup.
All right, that's good.
Here's your starting lineup, minus Joel Embiid and minus Paul George. They are out. We'll get to them in just a second as part of our injury report. Tyrese Maxey, Eric Gordon, Caleb Martin, Kelly Oubre, Andre Drummond. Those are your five starters for tonight. So, as we've seen with some of these preseason games that have gotten underway, we've seen the Celtics and the Nuggets play. We've seen their stars, their all-stars, their MVP candidates, all NBA players. Same thing with the Lakers. LeBron James did not play game one, but he played game two. And we already knew that Joel Embiid would not suit up very much into the preseason. If you follow any of our coverage from the Bahamas in training camp, we told you that he did not practice. He was not practicing. He did go through a lot of drills and walkthroughs with the team, but he did not a lot of 5-on-5 full court stuff.
He wasn't running up and down the floor.
He's not ramped up for this type of showcase, if you will, to start the season. So it makes sense for him not to be available right now. Andre Drummond getting the start, and this is why you bring Andre Drummond back for us to get a little bit of a teaser and a sample size of what it may look like when the big fella is not available.
And just judging from all the comments and all the things you guys heard when you were in the Bahamas, like, Devon, this is going to be. It seems kind of like a Kawhi 2018-19 load management season for Joel, which on the one hand, like, I completely support. I think it's very clear that he has accomplished pretty much everything in regular season basketball. It might be a little bit of a bummer. I'm thinking back to our show from last January when he scored 70 points against the Spurs. We're probably not going to see that, but he wants to get to April, and we want to get to a point where the Sixers want him to get to a point where he's not dragging his leg up and down the court in the first game of the postseason, right? That's got to be the key. So I think part of that means that not a heavy dosage in the preseason. They were kind of already on that schedule. He didn't play at all in the preseason last year.
No,
either.
he didn't. I think he played the very last game.
Oh, did he?
I think so.
That's right.
Yeah.
So he really has not played a ton of preseason basketball. But as you said, like as somebody who really is not doing a ton of the super physical stuff in practice, I'm a little worried about where he is physically, just because I did not like how he was moving in the Olympics, and that was the last time we saw him. Now maybe that's gotten a lot better over the past few months with rest and kind of this plan to ease him along. But I fully support what the plan is right now. And like you said, that means a lot of Andre Drummond, and the hope for the Sixers is, that it's not a disaster when Joel sits this year, that they have Drum. And I'm pretty confident that it's going to be at least decent. Like if they have Maxey, if they have Paul George, Drum can eat a ton of minutes as a kind of in a pinch starting. He's a good player, man. And I think as much as I kind of laughed at Drum earlier in his career when Joel was scoring 1 million points on him and then trolling him on Twitter afterwards, like that guy as your backup center on a team that desperately needs rebounding, that was a very solid signing. And I get it. Like he's going to throw the ball into the third row a few times. Like he's going to annoy you a little bit defensively. He doesn't have like the greatest instincts in the world at times, but he plays hard.
Yes.
And he's going to give you decent minutes. So I am excited for Drum to kind of make sure that the Sixers don't just collapse like they always have when Joel is sat out. I mean, honestly, Drum was Joel's best backup center of his career. Yep. And unfortunately, they had to make that trade to go get Harden. And I think, looking back at that trade, it's a fair move by Daryl Morey. Like, if you want to get that top, 2 or 3 player in your rotation, that star level player, you trade the backup center. But it's just nice now that they have Paul George back. They were able to sign him with cap space. Now they have Drum. Drum can be here for the entire year. And it starts tonight against the New Zealand Breakers, who I'm sure he will have a nice game against.
And you also look at the fact that no Paul George. So the Sixer fans, they're going to have to wait, a little bit longer to get a chance to see the top prize of the offseason coming to your town, your team, and a conversation that we were able to have earlier, Rich, talking about Paul George with Steven Jackson from All the Smoke, the All Smoke podcast with Matt Barnes. And he said...
Making a lot of noise lately, the All the Smoke podcast.
Yes, they are. And he mentioned it just a little bit. But he said... championship move when it came to Paul George, when Derek asked him the question about what he brings to the table. And again, you don't get a chance to see him tonight. That's okay, because what it's all about is when the regular season gets underway, and I'm sure we'll catch up with Paul George at some point during the preseason, but no Paul George tonight. That said, championship move when mentioned by Steven Jackson.
That doesn't surprise me, because I think, as you have noticed over the years, players have so much respect for Paul George. He's one of those guys that if you polled all the players around the league, I think it would shock a lot of fans how high they would rank him. I think Kyrie is another one who seems to have a ton of respect from those guys.
The Q rating is very good
among the players.
Very
and obviously,
good.
Steven Jackson, he's been retired for a minute here, but still, is somebody who definitely has played against Paul George in his career. Still talks to a ton of players.
Voice.
Yeah, for sure. So is it a championship move? I don't know. But obviously, I think we're all very excited about what the Sixers did this offseason. I'm kind of curious, have they talked at all about, is Paul George going to be eased along this season? I didn't catch that part. Just because
during the regular season?
Yeah, just because the Joel load management, the Joel health discussion has kind of been the one major story of the preseason so far.
Right.
But have they talked about, Paul George been playing in this league for a long time, dude.
And again, we want to push our conversation with Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson. Steven Jackson with us earlier today, but that was one of the things that I asked him, because yourself, all of us, while we may have championed the move, the question was, hey, the guy's still 34 years old. How is that going to hold up? What do you do? He has missed a number of games, but last season he played a decent amount. He played a decent amount last season, the season before as well. But it has been mentioned that they will watch and monitor how much he plays, but it's not going to be to the extreme and the level of what we talk about with Joel Embiid and real load management of making sure that he is only playing this certain amount of games where he's not. Joel, we know he's not going to qualify for any All-NBA or postseason awards because he probably won't reach that 65-game threshold.
He better not.
Right. So with that, it's not that far with Paul George, but yeah, they will take a peek at how they play him, how they monitor him, because it's been talked about quite a bit, man, that when Embiid is out, and Paul George said it at his press conference, his introductory press conference in July, where he pointed out, hey, in the conversations that I've had with Nick Nurse, we've discussed not having to put so much pressure on the big fella. having myself and Tyrese Maxey in the lineup, in the mix. So when he is down, Andre Drummond is in the game and he's starting or playing extended minutes in a game where Embiid, maybe they do watch his minutes a little bit. Paul George and Tyrese Maxey, I'd imagine, are going to play a lot of games, a lot of minutes together where they're going to be the features.
PG, Tyrese, and Drum, as long as you have Drum to play 30 minutes a game or whatever he's going to play, that is a great place to start for the non-Embiid games. I think they've had, you look at those plans over the years. It's funny. I'm seeing a lot of Jonah Bolden comments in the chat.
He was 40. Gene says
he was part of the backup center. At least I don't think he ever was
small ball
the backup center, but he got some looks at times. And I think I probably even said, why don't we throw Jonah out there? You know what's funny? My greatest Jonah Bolden memory from covering the team. Derek and I will always talk about this in the game in 2019, where Jimmy Butler and Jared Dudley I think they both got booted, right?
Yeah.
Because I think Dudley was getting physical with Ben Simmons and Joel. I think afterwards, Joel had that great interview where he said, first of all, he's a nobody or whatever. But in the middle of that game,
he's a nobody.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was a great game in Brooklyn.
Mr. Nobody. Yes.
And it was when
is that the Mike Scott
it
shot?
was the game where Mike Scott makes the three at the end of the game.
Mm-hmm.
In part because Jimmy Butler was not available to play anymore.
Got thrown out.
They brought Mike Scott.
I remember when the whole pile was moving, it was because Jimmy Butler came over and made sure the pile moved.
Yes.
And then he got tossed. Yes.
So in the middle of that game, Jonah Bolden had like the worst 3-minute stretch I've ever seen on an NBA basketball.
Brett Brown
I don't think I've ever seen Brett Brown that mad. He was screwing up offensive fouls, turnovers, missed assignments, and it was a get him the F out of the game timeout.
Brett Brown was get him out.
Anyway, so that is my main Jonah Bolden memory. Didn't quite last quite as long. Hopefully he's having a nice career over in New Zealand, not too far from Australia where he's from.
Yeah. So, again, a little revenge game for the New Zealand Breakers. Jonah Bolden, Taco Fall also on the roster, where we had Matt Walsh on last week, who is a majority owner. I know you're a big local basketball fan like myself and many people out there. And when we were talking to Matt, he brought up the Taco Fall addition to the team along with Jonah Bolden. We'll get to the young kid that everybody's talking about as well and what he is doing and his projection for the NBA a little bit later. But yeah, man, I mean, Jonah Bolden, he was a good talker. Let's just say that. And whenever you had a chance to interview Jonah Bolden during his time here, he could talk. Yeah. You didn't have to hold on to every word and hope you got a little bit more and pick something there to extend the conversation. The guy could chat. Yeah. So that's one good thing I could say about Jonah Bolden.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really have a ton of. I mean, he seemed like a nice guy, honestly.
Yeah, he was nice enough.
And honestly, like he was a second-round pick. Like it wasn't like he was automatically expected to be some great player. But yeah, he was here for a couple of years. He was the fellow Australian with Ben, and we will get to see him again. Like you said, Taco Fall. He was a very memorable NBA player for a guy who was really at the end of the bench because he was the human victory cigar for the Boston Celtics. There was a great video I remember when Brad Stevens was still the coach of the Celtics, and they were up by a lot, and their crowd would just go nuts for him. And it was basically like the put in taco chants. And at one point, Brad Stevens, who obviously is not like the most emotive guy in the world, like the most animated guy, he basically was like riling up the crowd, like, "Oh, do you really want him? Do you really want him?" And they went absolutely crazy, and then he threw him in.
Yeah.
It was a great video.
Yeah.
So anyway, that will make the first preseason game a little bit more fun tonight to see Taco out there.
Yeah, Taco, little Jonah Bolden. Does he get a video tribute preseason? Jonah Bolden? Does he get that?
Jonah Bolden?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that would be going the extra mile. We've seen.
So I would say no. Tobias Harris gets it in Game 4 when he comes back to Philadelphia for sure.
I have not seen
Jonah Bolden. No,
I can't even imagine the Sixers game ops have the the return videos ready to go already. It's just so early in the game. That would be something. But I will say the return video has been. I mean, NBA teams are doing it for guys who played 5 games for them at this point. It's crazy.
So Tobias Harris, 5.5 years.
Oh, he's gonna get one.
He's definitely gonna get one. The question is he going to get booed and all? We'll worry about that. We'll worry about that when we get there. Game 4, that'll be at home. We'll talk about that. Even though if you want to hear a little bit more about Tobias Harris, make sure you check out our conversation with Steven Jackson, because it was funny when he brought up Tobias Harris's name. All right, let's get to the keys to the game from Rich Hoffman. I'll give mine as we go along. We'll get yours in the chat as well. Keys to the game tonight, starters, Maxey, Gordon, Oubre, and Caleb Martin, along with Andre Drummond. I'd imagine we'll get to see a lengthy, healthy dose of some guys off the bench. So what are your keys to the game tonight? Or more so, who are your key players that you would like to see tonight in game one?
The guy that I really want to see is not starting, and the guy I want to see is Yabusele.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going another direction. I'll give mine after yours.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'd like to see Tyrese. Like, I mean, he's great player. Obviously, so much fun to watch. I'm sure he's gotten better in the offseason in ways we don't really appreciate. I mean, he is yoked right now, too, by the way. Like, he has really kind of put on some muscle.
Yeah.
But Yabusele's the guy, just because we haven't seen him in the NBA for a few years, had that great spell with France, playing in some really intense medal round Olympic basketball, had the big dunk over LeBron, all of those things. I'm excited to see him. I just want to, obviously he's a fun personality. He, as we saw, he's pretty athletic once he gets a head start. Can he make threes? Because that was a big issue for him previously. He's the guy that I'd like to see. I think I know where you're going with the other one.
Yeah, so with the Yabusele piece, just to give people an idea of what we saw when we were out there, you talk about yoked for Tyrese Maxey. Yabusele is yoked. But it's not like it was before with the Boston Celtics where they were worried about the weight. It's more muscle, and it fits better with what he's doing, the shooting from the outside, but also being light on his feet. It was something that we heard where the power is still there with the finesse, and that's something that you want to see. So if the shot is knocking down, that's a great luxury for them to have, but it's more about the other things, the hustle plays, the rebounding, because he is the most traditional power forward they have on this roster.
It really is.
So they may be able to use him in those certain spots, and they said he looked pretty good. And now look, it's training camp. Everybody looks good.
Everybody looks great.
Everybody looks good. Everybody looks great. But the
everybody
word really
can make
was
after practice.
Right, exactly. The word was, though, that he was surprising. Nick Nurse mentioned him on day one of one of the best surprises of day one for what they saw out there running. It's
a transition for him too, because as you know, the international game is super rugged. Like at some point 20 years ago, remember like when Puerto Rico was beating us, that 04 Olympic team, that was when international basketball, like it was supposed to be more skilled, right? That is completely flipped, where the NBA game, faster, more skilled, all of those things. The European game is like smash mouth football, man. It's like it's not really my cup of tea in terms of watching. I like to see, the skill level, the individual, the Kyrie type, players. Paul George, obviously, somebody mentioned in the chat how aesthetically pleasing Paul George is. I completely agree with that. European basketball, it's like a war under the rim.
Is.
So, he played at a very high level. Like, I think Real Madrid is one of the best teams outside of the NBA. Like, so you want to say the 30 NBA teams are the best teams in the world. Real Madrid
31, 32, somewhere around
33,
there.
30, somewhere in there.
All right.
So he played at a super high level, but it's a different game, right? There's much more space. There's much more moving your feet involved where, like you said, being light on your feet is really important. But I agree with what you said. That's why I was super excited when they signed him. It's like, he's a flyer. We're unsure if he's actually going to work.
Yep.
He struggled last time in the NBA. But there's a real chance for him to get minutes, because while I don't think Caleb Martin at the 4 is a huge issue if you have Embiid, the league plays smaller, we all switch now, all of those things, I think they really could use kind of a more rugged player. And if he proves to be NBA rotation level quality, they're going to play him here because they could use that skill set.
Yep. A couple of things that I want to see, that we get a chance to see. We only get to see 2 of them, but I want to see the combination of Caleb Martin and Kelly Oubre on the defensive end. The talent match, we know it's not there. But as far as how they communicate, how they work together on the floor, the switching possibilities, even without Paul George in the lineup, Eric Gordon in the starting lineup tonight, I want to see those 2. I want to see how that works. Secondly, I want to see the experiment of Andre Drummond shooting 3-pointers.
Oh, you want to see this?
Because when he was doing it at training camp, he was asked about it, and he said, I don't do anything without a purpose. So if he's doing it, it's because the coaches have asked him to do it. So if there are some of those sets where they run those pick and pop situations and he's out there on the perimeter, I want to see if he's going to make it. It's the preseason, like Ben Simmons against the Lions that you mentioned. It's Andre Drummond against the Breakers here in game 1 of the preseason. I already know what he's going to do inside, and I'd imagine he'll be there more than out there on the perimeter. But I want to see if he actually takes the shots that he said is for a purpose in the practices that they were having in training camp. And finally, I want to see Jared McCain.
Yeah.
We talked about him on draft night. You were more on my side on draft night of, I'm interested. I'm curious. We know what the background is. We know that there may be some matchup issues between he and Maxey on the floor together. Maybe we'll see that tonight also, the experiment there. But Joel Embiid said, and it could be Joel Embiid just being a great vet and setting up his rookie to look good for his training camp. But Joel Embiid talking about how he was the best player on day 3, I believe it was, so far through practice.
He got a lot of love, yeah.
He got a lot of love. So I want to see how real that might be against some different competition that are not his teammates tonight. So those are 3 things that I want to see. And right now, as we get started here for this game against the Breakers, tonight we check in the arena with Derek Bodner live from the center for our first check-in as we get started for the preseason game. And no surprise, Derek, no Paul George, no Joel Embiid, but we do get Tyrese Maxey and 2 other starters that we believe will be there in Oubre and Caleb Martin. How should we approach this one here with these guys? Do you know how long Nick Nurse expects to play Tyrese Maxey and a few of those other starters?
No, we didn't get a great breakdown of exactly how long each individual player is expected to be out there. I wouldn't expect anyone to play more than 20, 25 minutes. I think that is sort of the cap that you would have on pretty much anyone, but certainly someone as important as Tyrese Maxey. Like you mentioned, Paul George and Joel Embiid get the DNP old treatment. You expect that they will play infrequently, especially Joel. I think we've both said that you don't really expect him until maybe the latter portions of the preseason if he does suit up then. But for all of these players who are older in that range, not only Embiid and Paul George, but Kyle Lowry, they will be very cautious with them. So yeah, the starting lineup, Maxey, Eric Gordon, Oubre, Caleb Martin, and Drummond. I think that is a sort of what you would expect if you're going to tell me that Joel Embiid and Paul George were going to be out. And I think we will, I think there's a lot to, I know a lot of people will be frustrated maybe with that. Maybe they'll lose a little interest, but I think there's a lot of interesting subplots for this game. And that might just be the fact that I haven't watched this team play basketball in 5 months and I'm itching for it.
Derek, there are rumors that tonight is going to be the best atmosphere in Philadelphia sports over the past week. Can you confirm or deny that?
Well, I was not in the building last night. I know you were at the bank. I was a complete disaster for most of that game, as I think a lot of people were, and especially with that 2-run homer after they took the lead. So certainly this will be one of the more stress-free environments we have seen in Philadelphia sports in quite some time. That is definitely true.
It really is going to be a lot easier to watch. Okay, so yes. Devon and I just talked about some of the players that we're looking forward to seeing. But let's take Tyrese out of it just because obviously he's the most exciting guy that they have on the team that is playing right now. Outside of him, who are you most excited to see tonight?
No, I think what I joined right at the end, I think you guys were pretty on point there. Jared McCain, I think it's going to be real interesting to see him play. Part of that is because there's just such an unknown factor, and that's why if I had to list a second guy, it would probably be Gershon Yabusele, just players who have not played in the NBA. I know they're not necessarily going against NBA players right now, although you do have a former NBA player in Jonah Bolden, but just see where they are and picking up what Nick Nurse wants them to do. We were obviously there in the Bahamas where we heard Joel Embiid, declare Jared McCain the best player in training camp. Let's see what he was able to take from that and apply that now towards an NBA game. It's just a chance to see a lot of these theoretical players and see how they fit and see how they pick up what Nick Nurse has been trying to get them to buy into.
Yeah, and a few, just talking about a few others, we've discussed Ricky Council, KJ Martin, what that looks like as well. And one of the other things that I mentioned too, Derek, was just to see at least game one competition is not the NBA competition, but to see the communication and how some of it looks without Paul George, the combination of Kelly Oubre and Caleb Martin out there on the perimeter. Again, the communication, how they switch, what it looks like out there without those guys, something else that we highlighted to take a look at tonight.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is a team that has a lot of size on the wings, and that's something that obviously Nick Nurse utilized a lot in his Toronto days. He had some of it last year, maybe not as much as he was accustomed to. So now you have a team that has some really good athletes, some really good size, on the perimeter. You don't have quite as much because Paul George isn't there, but from Kelly to Caleb to Ricky, let's see how he utilizes them. That will certainly be an interesting subplot.
You know, it was funny. You guys, I forget which day of training camp it was, but what was the phrase that Nick Nurse had on all the sweatshirts? It was "the ball wins." Was that what it was?
Yeah.
And you looked at it, and the Sixers were actually pretty good at the possession game last year, Derek. Like they actually, in terms of taking care of the ball and turning people over, they were awesome at it. It feels like those sweatshirts should have just said "rebound the damn ball." Which frankly, getting Andre Drummond should help at least in that department, right? You know, he might take a little bit off the table elsewhere. I guess like just being around, you know, Devon talked about Drummond shooting threes. I'm curious what you think about that. But really just like having Drummond back, having him in this role where it seems like he's going to start a lot of games because they're going to be really careful with Joel. Just like the state of where Drum is right now.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% on point because they were among the league leaders in forcing turnovers, especially with Tyrese Maxey running the show. They didn't turn the ball over a lot. So it really is like that ethos is really rebound the damn ball. I think that's a good way to summarize what they are saying. But yeah, I think Drummond is like, he will help. He will never be the full solution on the glass, in part because he's only going to play 15 minutes per night, but in part because it has to be a team effort. It has to be a team effort both in terms of closing down driving lanes and then also crashing glass. If you're not in rotation, if you're not constantly closing out to shooters and trying to recover, you'll be in better position to rebound. So if they can defend better on the perimeter, that's why when a lot of these conversations, you know, you get into them, a lot of it goes back to, all right, well, those three wings on the perimeter or the better size on the perimeter, you can switch more or that at the very least can be competent and hold up defensively more. That will help your rebounding battle. But I think Drummond's in a good spot. You know, he's a guy in a veteran who at one point was an all-star caliber player, certainly a starting center in this league, a big money starting center in this league, who's now embraced coming off of the bench. And that's a transformation that you don't always see. It's something that big men specifically have to go through quite a bit because of how devalued the position is and how you don't have traditional fours anymore. But I think he's embraced that. I think he's in a good spot because of it. And I do think he will certainly help them, not only just from the rebounding, but also just being competitive with Joel Embiid on the bench, which hopefully means that Joel Embiid will be a little more willing to embrace taking more nights off.
Absolutely. Well, Derek, we appreciate it, man. We appreciate you checking in. We don't have enough time, so we'll get to it a little bit later, but I know the scouter in you wants to see Kareem Lopez after we talked to Matt Walsh last week and so many others speaking about him after his 13-point performance, also a 17-year-old against the Utah Jazz. We'll get to that a little bit more in the postgame and even tomorrow. Thanks so much, man. We'll check in with you later. Thanks.
Yep, thank you.
You got it, Derek Bodner, live from the arena as we get ready for the Sixers and the Breakers. Predictions, they win.
I think they're going to win.
They win. They lost to the Jazz. The Breakers did 116-87, but they do have some professional talent there and very, very, very interested and curious to see what Lopez looks like as a 17-year-old, right? Rich, 17-year-old. And Matt talked about him, raved about him. I saw that Jonathan Givony, who is, you know, we know the big international guy and for ESPN and what he has done with Draft Express and recognizing his talent early with these young players. He raves about him. He had 13 against the Utah Jazz, 5 for 8 from the floor. No three-pointers, by the way. So the kid appears to be really, really good. And I can't wait to see him tonight along with Jonah Bolden and Taco Fall.
Yeah, and I mean, that Australian league has produced some NBA players. Like that has become an option to go play there instead of go to college. LaMelo Ball is probably the most famous one that I'm thinking of right now.
Yes.
So I'm excited to watch him. And yeah, you've seen, you know, throughout the years, whether it's an Australian guy or somebody playing in Europe, like I remember Luka Doncic,
the next guy
showed out, right?
Yep.
And somebody, don't want to put that much pressure on him, but you know, it'll be good to watch. So Devon, I am excited. It is a low pressure night, but we think this team is going to be pretty good this year. We got a lot of new pieces to discuss.
Yes.
So I think, you know, a nice little break from the Phillies, just biting your nails for 3 hours. Just watch little hoops, you know, watch Tyrese make a couple threes.
Stress-free.
Right?
Stress-free. Little teaser as the preseason gets underway. We appreciate you all joining in. Don't forget, we will be back for a preseason postgame tonight. Rich, myself, Brianna, all of you, we hope that you are able to join us. So enjoy the game. We appreciate, again, our sponsors, Coors Light and Bet365. Have a great time enjoying the game. We'll talk to you afterwards, Sixers and Breakers, and we'll discuss it here on the PHLY Sixers podcast.
We all silly like the mayor.